Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku was the sidekick of Captain Man. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The air in Nizudafu, Japan, tasted of ozone and fear. It was a flavor Izuku Midoriya had become far too familiar with. Sirens wailed a mournful, cyclical song in the distance, a soundtrack to the chaos currently unfolding in the Kiyoshi Ward shopping district. Concrete dust, kicked up from cratered pavement, hazed the afternoon sun into a sickly orange smear. Hero Deku. His perimeter is unstable. We can't predict where the rifts will open. An officer yelled from behind a hastily erected barricade, his voice strained with desperation. Izuku didn't need the warning. He could see it, feel it in the strange, gut-twisting pressure that preceded each new tear in reality. His opponent, a villain calling himself Warplock, was less of a fighter and more of a walking natural disaster. He was a lanky man in a bodysuit covered in shimmering, circuit-like patterns, his face obscured by a chrome helmet. His quirk, unstable gait, did exactly what the name implied. It ripped open small, volatile portals to somewhere else. They weren't stable, they weren't controllable, and anything that went through them didn't seem to come back. No discernible pattern, Izuku thought, his mind racing faster than his feet. He skidded to a halt, green lightning crackling around him as he maintained one for all, full cowling at a steady 8%. He isn't aiming. The portals manifest near areas of high kinetic energy. He's reacting to our movements. The more we attack, the more chaotic the battlefield becomes. A shimmering, purple-edged fissure, no bigger than a dinner plate, opened in the air next to his head. He dodged, the strange suction of the portal tugging at his hair. A chunk of debris from a nearby building was pulled in and vanished with a faint, final pop. "Stand still and let it happen, you little gnat!" Warplock shrieked, his voice tinny and distorted through his helmet. He flailed his arms, and a dozen more rifts blinked into existence around him like malevolent eyes. Izuku grit his teeth. This was a battle of attrition and precision. He couldn't use a large-scale smash. The sheer force would likely trigger a massive, city-block-swallowing portal. He needed to get in close, to incapacitate Warplock before he could react. He used his black whip, launching thin, dark tendrils of energy to snag pieces of rubble, pulling himself forward in a rapid, unpredictable zigzag pattern. He was closing in, could see the panic in the villain's posture. Just a few more meters. He prepared a tightly focused Delaware smash, aiming to use the pressurized air blast to knock him out without a direct physical help. The cry cut through the din of combat like a shard of glass. Izuku's head whipped to the side. A young woman, a shopping bag dropped at her feet with its contents spilled across the pavement, was frozen in terror. Not 10 feet behind her, the air began to ripple and distort. A massive portal, far larger than any of the others, was tearing itself into existence. It wasn't just a hole, it was a vortex, a swirling nebula of impossible colors that hummed with a deep, menacing thrum. There was no time for analysis. No time for a plan. His body moved before his brain could finish processing the danger. "Danger sense is screaming at me," he muttered, the words a reflex of habit. He pushed one for all to 15%, the strain a familiar burn in his muscles. The ground cracked beneath his feet as he launched himself forward, a green blur of pure heroic instinct. He reached the woman in a heartbeat, his armored gloves making contact with her shoulder. "Get back!" he yelled, shoving her with all his might. She stumbled, falling backward, away from the yawning maw of the portal. He had saved her. That was the last coherent thought he had. The pull was instantaneous and absolute. It wasn't like wind or suction. It was as if the universe had decided his specific coordinates were no longer valid and was violently correcting its error. The world dissolved into a sickening torrent of light and sound. He saw flashes of starfields, of swirling green energies that mirrored his own, of geometric patterns that made his head ache. He heard a symphony of static, whispers in a language he didn't understand, and the deafening roar of 1,000 cosmic winds. His body felt like it was being unraveled and respun into thread. One for all, the comforting, ever-present fire in his soul, flickered and sputtered like a dying candle in a hurricane. The connection to the vestiges, to All Might, felt stretched thin, a fragile cord about to snap. Then, just as suddenly as it began, it ended. The landing was not a landing. It was an impact. Izuku slammed into something hard, metallic, and profoundly smelly. The force knocked the wind out of him in a pained gasp. He tumbled, his armor screeching against brick, and came to a final, jarring stop in a pile of damp cardboard boxes. For a long moment, he just lay there, every inch of his body screaming in protest. His head throbbed, a dull, pounding drumbeat behind his eyes. The world was a blurry mess, spinning lazily. The air smelled different. Greasy. Heavy with the scent of fried food and stale water. He pushed himself up, his arms trembling. His gamma costume was in tatters. The right gauntlet was sparking pathetically, its internal wiring fried. A large tear ran down his left leg, and his mask was cracked across the visor, a spiderweb of fractures distorting his vision. Uraraka-san? Ida-kun? Can anyone hear me? He rasped, tapping the side of his headpiece. Static. Dead, empty static. His heart began to hammer against his ribs, a frantic, panicked rhythm. He staggered to his feet, using a grimy wall for support. He was in a narrow alleyway. A dumpster overflowed with black trash bags. A single, flickering fluorescent light cast long, eerie shadows. The buildings were made of red brick, squat and utilitarian, so different from the sleek, towering skyscrapers of Muzidafu. Signs on the far end of the alley were written in an alphabet he recognized, but the words were foreign. Nacho ball? Dumpsters are for authorized personnel only. English, he whispered, the realization dawning on him. I'm in an English-speaking country. America? Europe? The portal could have sent him anywhere. Panic, cold and sharp, began to seep into his veins. He was alone. Injured. Disconnected. He needed to assess the damage. He needed to calm down. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath that did little to steady his nerves, and reached inward for the familiar, comforting blaze of One for All. He focused, calling on that wellspring of power, preparing to activate full cowling at just 1% to check his injuries and get his bearings. He waited for the surge, for the green lightning to dance across his skin, for the hum of stored energy to fill his limbs. Nothing. A cold dread, far more terrifying than any villain, washed over him. He tried again, focusing harder, gritting his teeth. Come on, come on! He pushed with his will, begging the quirk to respond. He felt a faint, ghost-like flicker, a tiny spark of warmth deep within him that died as quickly as it came. It was like trying to start a car with a dead battery. The engine wouldn't even turn over. No, he breathed, his voice trembling. No, no, no. He held up his hand, staring at it as if it belonged to a stranger. This hand had channeled the power of 8 heroes. It had smashed meteor-sized robots and broken through solid rock. Now, it was just a hand, shaking. Powerless. The reality crashed down on him with the force of a physical blow. The portal hadn't just transported him, it had damaged him. It had severed his connection to his power, his legacy, his very identity as a hero. He was quirkless. Again. But this was worse. So much worse. He had tasted flight, and now his wings had been torn from his back. Tears welled in his eyes, hot and shameful. He slid down the grimy wall, his back scraping against the rough brick, and pulled his knees to his chest. He was a castaway on a foreign shore, stripped of everything that made him Deku. He was just Izuku Midoriya, a lost, terrified teenager a world away from home. He didn't know how long he sat there, consumed by a vortex of fear and despair. It could have been minutes, or an hour. The passage of time had lost all meaning. It was a strange, high-pitched wee, followed by a resounding splat that finally pulled him from his stupor. It was followed by a man's booming, ridiculously cheerful voice. Well, well, well. If it isn't the toddler. I thought I smelled dirty diapers and poor life choices. Izuku's head snapped up. His hero training, ingrained so deeply it was practically cellular, overrode his panic. A civilian was in trouble. He pushed himself to his feet, ignoring the ache in his ribs, and crept toward the mouth of the alley. He peeked around the corner and blinked. He blinked again, certain the portal had done some permanent damage to his optic nerves. The scene before him was utterly, incomprehensibly bizarre. A wide street was blocked off by what looked like a giant, mobile baby bottle mounted on a tank chassis. The bottle was connected by a thick hose to a fire hydrant, and it was pumping a milky white fluid into the city's water main. Standing atop the contraption was a short, bald man dressed in a cloth diaper, a baby's bonnet, and nothing else. He was shaking a comically oversized rattle at a man in a garish red, white, and blue superhero costume. "You're too late, Captain Man." The diapered man, presumably the toddler, squealed in a gratingly high voice. "Soon, all of Swellview will be drinking my nutritious, vitamin-enriched, extra chunky baby formula. That's disgusting, toddler. And you know how I feel about chunky liquids." The hero, Captain Man, retorted. He had a chiseled jaw, perfect hair, and an expression of theatrical indignation. A group of men, also dressed as oversized babies, charged at Captain Man, brandishing pacifier-shaped clubs. Izuku's brain struggled to process the information. It was like watching a fever dream. His mind, trained to analyze threats and quirks, went into overdrive. Is the man's quirk related to accelerated or deaccelerated aging? No, his muscular structure is fully developed. Perhaps a psychological quirk compelling him to infantile behavior? And the hero, his costume is impractical, offering minimal protection. But his confidence is absolute. He displays no visible quirk usage, relying on hand-to-hand combat. Captain Man dispatched the goons with an almost casual grace, using moves that were more slapstick than martial arts. He dodged a swing and one goon ended up hitting another. He pulled on one's diaper, causing it to snap back with a loud thwack. It was effective, but it was also absurd. This world's heroing was different. The toddler, seeing his henchman defeated, shrieked and pressed a large red button on his console. A cannon emerged from the side of the giant baby bottle and fired a glob of what looked like thick, sticky applesauce, trapping Captain Man's feet to the ground. "Ha! Stuck in my sticky spitter, Captain Man!" the toddler cackled. "Now you have to watch as my formulification of Swellview is complete." Captain Man struggled, pulling at his feet, but the substance held firm. "Ugh! It's in my boots. This is worse than the time I got stuck in the industrial vat of mayonnaise." He was trapped. The villain was succeeding. And no other heroes were arriving. Izuku didn't think. He acted. His legs pumped, carrying him out of the alley and onto the street. The powerlessness, the fear, the confusion, it all vanished, replaced by the singular, burning drive that had defined his entire life. "Help people. Hey! Villain!" he yelled, his voice cracking slightly. The toddler and Captain Man both turned to look at him. He must have been a strange sight, a kid in a tattered, futuristic green hero costume, bleeding from a cut on his forehead, looking utterly out of place. "Who's the little green bean?" the toddler asked, tilting his head. "I don't know, but I like his costume," Captain Man replied with a grin. A little on the nose with the rabbit ears, though. Ignoring them, Izuku planted his feet, his body falling into a familiar stance. Muscle memory took over. He drew his right leg back, channeling a lifetime of yearning and 9 generations of power into the motion. This was it. Even a flicker, a tiny spark of one for all would be enough to create a distraction. He swung his leg forward, putting every ounce of his being into the kick. Detroit. SMA, woof. The word died in his throat. There was no surge of power. No flash of green lightning. No shockwave. His leg, expecting the explosive recoil of one for all, met only empty air. His balance, calibrated for a world-altering force, was thrown completely off. He stumbled forward, tripped over his own feet, and fell flat on his face with a pathetic, graceless skid. The world stopped. One of the toddler's goons let out a snort of laughter. Humiliation, hot and absolute, washed over Izuku. He lay on the asphalt, the rough surface scraping his cheek, wishing a portal would open up right beneath him and swallow him whole. He had tried to be a hero and had ended up as the punchline to a joke he didn't even understand. Captain Man stared. Well, that was a bold entrance. A for effort, D for execution. The toddler howled with laughter. The little green bean is clumsy. Get him, boys. 2 of the baby goons started lumbering toward Izuku. Panic flared again. he was defenseless. Utterly and completely defenseless. He pushed himself up, scrambling backward on his hands and elbows. His mind, a frantic whirlwind of self-loathing and terror, suddenly latched onto something else. Not his own failure, but the scene in front of him. His eyes, sharp and analytical even in his panic, started to scan. His body had failed him, but his mind was still his own. He wasn't Deku, the wielder of one for all. He was Izuku Midoriya, the quirkless boy who filled notebooks with hero analysis for the future. And that boy was a weapon in his own right. The muttering started, quiet and rapid, a habit he thought he had mostly kicked. The tank, custom-built chassis, but the weight distribution is all wrong. The bottle is too heavy for the frame. Look at the strain on the axles. No, not the axles, the support struts connecting the bottle to the base. It's a rush job. The welding is sloppy, especially on the left side, right above the main pump mechanism. The pump is vibrating, putting constant stress on that specific joint, a sustained, high-frequency vibration on a weak weld. That's a critical failure point. If that strut breaks, the whole bottle will tip. The center of gravity is too high. He was on his feet now, his eyes wide, pupils dilated as he processed a dozen variables a second. The goons were getting closer, but they didn't matter. The whole world had narrowed down to that single, flawed piece of machinery. Captain Man was still struggling with the sticky applesauce, more annoyed than concerned. Seriously? Is this stuff gluten-free? Because my skin is very sensitive. The support bracket. Izuku screamed, his voice raw and desperate, pointing a shaking finger. On the left. The weld is faulty. It's the weakest point. Captain Man paused his struggling, his head cocking to the side. He squinted at the giant baby bottle, following Izuku's finger. He saw the slight, almost imperceptible tremor at the point where the massive bottle was bolted to the tank tread. He saw the discoloration of a hasty, amateurish weld. The kid was right. A slow grin spread across Captain Man's face. Hey, you've got a good eye, Green Bean. The toddler, distracted by Izuku's outburst, yelled, What are you looking at? There's nothing, Ro. He was cut off by the sound of something whizzing through the air. Captain Man, with a flick of his wrist, had pried one of the giant pacifier clubs from a defeated goon and hurled it like a boomerang. It spun through the air, a perfect arc of plastic justice, and struck the compromised support bracket with a deafening crack. For a second, nothing happened. Then, with a groan of tortured metal, the weld gave way. The entire left side of the giant bottle slumped. The delicate balance was shattered. With the slow, majestic inevitability of a falling redwood, the massive baby bottle tipped over. It crashed onto the street with a sound like a thunderclap, splitting open like a melon. A tidal wave of lukewarm, chunky baby formula erupted from the breach, flooding the street. The wave washed over the toddler and his remaining goons, sweeping them off their feet and carrying them down the road in a lurching, undignified torrent of white sludge. The applesauce holding Captain Man's feet dissolved in the deluge. He stood there, dripping but triumphant, as the toddler and his henchmen bobbed away, sputtering and flailing. And that, Captain Man declared to the empty street, striking a heroic pose, is how you deal with a cranky baby. You give him a bath. He held the pose for a few seconds before finally relaxing and turning his attention to the strange, green-clad boy who was now swaying on his feet. The adrenaline that had fueled Izuku's analysis was gone, replaced by an all-consuming wave of exhaustion. The physical trauma of the portal transit, the emotional devastation of losing his quirk, the spike of terror and humiliation, it all hit him at once. His vision tunneled. The sounds of the city faded into a dull roar. The last thing he saw before the world went black was the ridiculously handsome face of Captain Man, his expression a mixture of confusion, amusement, and something else Izuku couldn't quite place, intrigue. Whoa there, kid, Captain Man said, rushing forward and catching Izuku just before he hit the pavement. He easily lifted the boy into his arms. He was lighter than he looked. He looked down at the unconscious teenager, at the strange, advanced-looking but damaged costume, and the earnest, tear-streaked face. The kid had run into a supervillain fight with no powers, tripped over his own feet, and then won the battle with a single sentence. Captain Man had seen a lot of weird things in his time as Swellview's protector. A lot. But this was new. He looked down the street at the mess of formula and defeated villains. The police would handle that. He had a more pressing mystery cradled in his arms. He tapped a button on his belt buckle. "Schwoz, I'm coming down. And I've got a guest." He looked around to make sure no one was watching, then dragged the unconscious Izuku towards the back of a nearby, unassuming store called Junk and Stuff. He whistled a cheerful tune as he went. He hadn't had a sidekick in a while. The man cave had been quiet. Too quiet. And this strange, clumsy, brilliant kid was the most interesting thing to happen to Swellview in years. Standing on a hidden platform in the back room, Captain Man held onto Izuku and smiled at the ceiling. "Up the tube," he declared, and with a familiar whoosh of air, the hero and his unexpected ward disappeared from sight, descending into the secrets that lay deep beneath the streets of Swellview. The first thing to return was sound. A low, consistent hum, punctuated by the rhythmic, gentle beep of a machine somewhere to his left. It was a clean sound, technological and sterile, a stark contrast to the grimy chaos he had last remembered. The second was smell. It was an odd combination. There was the antiseptic scent of a clinic, but underneath it, a strange cocktail of burnt popcorn, ozone, and something vaguely like cinnamon-flavored bubble gum. It was confusing, and not entirely unpleasant. Izuku Midoriya's eyelids fluttered open. They felt heavy, as if tiny weights were attached to his lashes. The light was dim, soft blues and purples emanating from glowing panels on the ceiling. He wasn't in an alleyway anymore. He was lying on a comfortable, reclined bed, a thin, surprisingly warm blanket draped over him. An 4-tube was taped neatly to the back of his hand, feeding a clear liquid into his veins. He turned his head, his neck stiff. He was in some kind of high-tech laboratory or medical bay. Wires snaked across the floor in organized bundles, leading to monitors displaying fluctuating green lines and complex schematics he didn't recognize. Strange, metallic contraptions sat on workbenches, some half-assembled, others sparking faintly with contained energy. In one corner, a large glass tube filled with a bubbling, iridescent liquid served as a giant, hypnotic lava lamp. Panic, a familiar and unwelcome friend, returned with a vengeance. He had been taken. Captured. Where was he? Who were these people? His eyes darted around the room, searching for his costume, his gear, any semblance of the life he knew. He saw his tattered gamma suit, folded neatly on a chair, the armored pieces cleaned of grime but still showing the deep scratches and tears from his disastrous arrival. He sat up too quickly. The room spun, and a wave of nausea washed over him. A sharp pain lanced through his ribs. "Ack," he grunted, clutching his side. He closed his eyes, taking a deep, shuddering breath. He needed to think. He needed his quirk. He reached inward again, desperately searching for the familiar warmth of One for All. He found only a hollow, aching void. It was like reaching for a limb that had been amputated, his very soul feeling the phantom pain of its absence. A tiny, frustrated tear escaped the corner of his eye and traced a path down his cheek. "Ah! You are awake!" The voice was loud, cheerful, and saturated with a thick, unidentifiable European accent. Izuku's eyes snapped open. A short, wild-haired man in a lab coat worn over a plaid vest and mismatched socks slid into view on a wheeled office chair, narrowly avoiding a collision with a stack of humming hard drives. He held a tablet in one hand and a half-eaten pretzel in the other. "Do not be sitting up so fast. Your body has sustained significant cellular disruption from the dimensional transponderference," the man said, taking a large bite of his pretzel and chewing loudly. Izuku stared, bewildered. He opened his mouth to ask the dozen frantic questions swirling in his mind, but only Japanese came out. "Where am I? Who are you? What happened to the villain?" The man blinked, his bushy eyebrows knitting together. "That Vasta?" Sounded like you sneezed in reverse. From the other side of the room, another voice chimed in, smooth and casual. "I think he's speaking Japanese, schwoz." Izuku turned to see the man from the street, Captain Man, leaning against a metal console. He was out of his costume now, wearing a simple Henley shirt and jeans. His hair was still perfect. He was holding a plastic tube and squeezing a glob of purple goo that was probably yogurt directly into his mouth. The sight was so jarringly casual that it momentarily stunned Izuku into silence. "Ah, Japanese!" the man named Schwoz exclaimed, as if it were a fascinating new element he'd just discovered. "I am not having a translator for that. I have one for dolphin, and for a little bit of bear, but not Japanese." Captain Man, or the man who was Captain Man, pushed himself off the console and walked over. He looked down at Izuku, his expression a mixture of curiosity and amusement. "Hey, kid. You okay? You took a pretty hard nap back there on the street." Izuku just stared at him, his mind failing to bridge the gap between the languages. Ray sighed and resorted to the universal language of pointing and gesturing. "You," he said, pointing at Izuku. "Sleepy, sleepy." He mimed sleeping, resting his head on his folded hands. "Me," he pointed to himself. "Hero." Kapow! Biff! Bam! He threw a few slow-motion air punches. Izuku just looked more confused. This man was the hero who had saved the city. He was acting like a tourist trying to order food. "Oh, for goodness sake, let me see," Schwoz huffed, pushing past Ray. He started rummaging through a drawer filled with a chaotic tangle of wires, circuit boards, and what looked like a rubber chicken. "He is needing the, where did I put it, not the nose hair trimmer that sings opera. Aha!" He triumphantly pulled out a small, metallic patch, no bigger than a postage stamp. The Universal Language Synaptic Decoder. A Schwoz original. He scurried over to Izuku's bedside. "This will not hurt." "Okay, maybe a little. It will feel tingly. Like a tiny gerbil is licking your brain." Before Izuku could protest, Schwoz leaned in and slapped the patch onto the skin just behind his right ear. For a split second, there was a strange buzzing sensation, a faint tickle that ran from his ear to the base of his skull. He heard a faint chorus of what sounded like 1,000 tiny voices whispering at once, then silence. "Can you understand me now, little green bean?" Schwoz asked, his accent suddenly, miraculously, crystal clear in Izuku's mind. Izuku's eyes widened. He could understand him perfectly. The words weren't being translated in his ear. His brain was simply processing English as if it were his native tongue. "Ah yes," Izuku said, his own voice sounding strange to his ears as it came out in halting, but understandable, English. "I can understand you." "How?" "It tickles the language part of the brain," Schwoz said proudly, puffing out his chest. "Simple neurolinguistic programming." "Now who are you? And why does my bioscanner say your cellular structure is vibrating at a frequency that is not of this reality?" The man in the Henley shirt, Ray, Izuku assumed, stepped forward, holding up a hand. "Easy, Schwoz. Let the kid breathe. We pulled you out of that alley, brought you here. I'm Ray Manchester. This is Schwoz, and this," he said, gesturing to the vast, cavernous space around them, "is the man cave." Izuku took in the full scope of the room for the first time. It was immense. A massive, multi-screen computer system dominated one wall. Strange tubes, wide enough for a person, lined another. There was a circular couch, a kitchen area with a bizarre food dispensing machine, and various other stations that looked like a cross between a superhero's headquarters and a billionaire's rec room. You're Captain Man," Izuku said, the pieces clicking into place. Ray grinned, a flash of the heroic persona returning. "In the flesh." "Well, in different, more comfortable clothes. The suit can chafe in some strategic areas. Now, the scans." Schwoz interrupted, unable to contain his scientific curiosity any longer. He grabbed his tablet and pulled up a complex 3D model of Izuku's body, glowing with various energy signatures. "Your physical injuries are minor," Schwoz began, pointing a finger at the screen. "Some deep bruising, a hairline fracture on your 7th rib, mild concussion. I have administered a nutrient solution to accelerate the healing. But that is the boring part. The interesting part is this." He zoomed in on the image, showing a representation of Izuku's energy. It was a brilliant, star-like core, but it was flickering erratically, like a faulty light bulb. Tendrils of light would reach out, only to fizzle and die. "I have never seen anything like it," Schwoz breathed, his eyes wide with wonder. It is an incredible source of biological energy. Far beyond any quirk. He paused. Wait, you would not know what a quirk is? It is like a superpower that. I know what a quirk is, Izuku said quietly, his gaze fixed on the flickering light that represented his soul. That is my quirk. One for all. Schwoz and Ray exchanged a look. One for all? Ray repeated. Sounds dramatic. What does it do? It's a stockpiling quirk, Izuku explained, his voice barely a whisper. It's passed down from person to person, growing stronger with each new user. It granted me superhuman strength, speed, and agility. Granted? Past tense? Ray asked, his casual demeanor sharpening with focus. Izuku nodded, a lump forming in his throat. When I came through that portal, something happened. I can't access it. It's just gone. Not gone. Schwoz corrected, tapping his screen excitedly. That is the fascinating part. Your quirk is not gone. It is simply disconnected. Imagine you have a very, very long telephone cord, stretching all the way from here, back to your home dimension. He used his hands to illustrate, stretching them as far apart as they could go. The portal, it was a very messy call. It stretched and frayed the cord. Now, the connection is bad. Sometimes, a little bit of the signal gets through. He made a crackling, electric sound, bzzzt. A spark, but most of the time. He blew a raspberry. Pfft. Nothing. A dead line. Izuku stared at him, Schwoz's absurdly simple analogy hitting him with the weight of scientific fact. It wasn't gone. Hope, a fragile, trembling thing, fluttered in his chest. Can you fix it? Can you fix the connection? Schwoz's excited expression faltered. He looked down at his tablet, then back at Izuku, his gaze softening with something that looked like pity. My boy, to fix the cord, we would need to have both ends. We only have your end. The other end, it is in another universe. The fragile hope in Izuku's chest shattered into a million pieces. What about the portal? He asked, his voice desperate now. The villain, Warplock, he created it. If you can find him, maybe he can open another one? He can send me back. Ray stepped forward, his expression grim. He placed a hand gently on Izuku's shoulder. Kid. I'm sorry. When we got there, the police had already rounded up the toddler and his guys. There was no sign of anyone else. No villain with a portal quirk. No trace. The implications were suffocating. The one person who could potentially get him home was gone. He was trapped. Stranded. An alien in a world of slapstick heroes and baby-themed villains, with a broken power and no way back. The reality was a physical weight, pressing down on his chest, making it hard to breathe. The single tear from before was joined by others, and soon he was crying silently, his shoulders shaking with the force of his despair. He didn't bother to hide it. He was too tired, too broken to feel embarrassed. Ray and Schwoz stood in awkward silence for a moment. Ray, a man who solved problems by punching them or making a witty quip, was out of his depth. He looked at Schwoz, who just shrugged helplessly. Ray sighed, running a hand through his perfect hair. He pulled up a stool and sat down next to Izuku's bed. Look, what's your name, kid? He asked gently. Izuku Midoriya, he sniffled. Okay, Izuku. This is a lot. I get it. Your whole world just got flipped upside down and shaken like a snow globe. He paused, waiting for Izuku's sobs to subside into hitched breaths. I can't promise you we can find a way to send you home. Schwoz is a genius, but interdimensional travel isn't exactly something you can just whip up on a Tuesday. It is more of a Thursday afternoon project, Schwoz muttered, tinkering with a device on his workbench. Ray ignored him. But I can offer you something else. Izuku looked up, his eyes red-rimmed and puffy. What? When you ran out into that street, Ray said, his voice losing its casual tone and taking on a serious edge. What were you thinking? I don't know, Izuku admitted. I just saw you were in trouble. A hero needed help. So I moved. You moved, Ray repeated, a small, impressed smile touching his lips. You ran at a supervillain, knowing you had no powers. You fell on your face, got laughed at, and you still didn't quit. Your body failed, so you used your head. You analyzed the situation faster than my supercomputer could have and found a weak spot I never would have seen. You, kid, won that fight. Not me. He leaned forward, his eyes locking with Izuku's. I've seen people with incredible powers who are cowards. I've seen people with no powers who are the bravest people I know. What you have, what you did back there, that's the real stuff. That's what makes a hero. The powers are just flashy extras. The words struck a chord deep inside Izuku, echoing the first time All Might had ever given him hope. You too can become a hero. I haven't had a partner in a while, Ray continued, his gaze drifting for a moment to a darkened corner of the man cave where a red and yellow uniform used to stand. It's been quiet. Too quiet. And honestly, I'm getting tired of having to come up with all the witty banter myself. He looked back at Izuku, his expression resolute. I can't offer you a way home, Izuku. But I can offer you a place to stay. Food from that weird machine over there that almost never gets the order right. And a purpose. I need a sidekick. Someone smart, someone with a good heart, who knows what it means to run toward the danger, not away from it. I can train you. Shuo's can build you gear to make up for the flickering. Shuo's head perked up at the mention of gear. Ooh. Yes. Gadgets. I can make you rocket boots. A laser lasso. A belt that makes toast. You must study this flickering. The interdimensional energy resonance. The biological impact on a human subject. It is the most exciting scientific puzzle I have ever seen. Izuku stared from Rei's earnest face to Shuo's manic grin. It was an insane proposal. Utterly, completely insane. His life's dream had been to become the #1 hero in Japan, at UA High School, following in All Might's footsteps. This was a detour into another reality entirely. But what other choice did he have? He was alone. A 15-year-old boy in a foreign country, a foreign dimension, with no money, no identification, and a power that was as reliable as a chocolate teapot. He could end up on the streets, or in a government lab being dissected like Shuo seemed so eager to do, or he could be a hero. It wouldn't be the hero he had planned to be. It wouldn't be for the people of Muzutafu. But Rei was right. The drive to save people, the burning need to help, that wasn't part of One for All. That was all his, and it was still there, flickering just as stubbornly as his quirk. Ray Manchester wasn't All Might. His methods were bizarre, his attitude flippant. But when he spoke about what it meant to be a hero, Izuku saw a flicker of the same fire. He saw a man who, beneath the jokes and the perfect hair, genuinely wanted to protect people. The choice was clear. It was a lifeline in an ocean of despair. Izuku wiped the remaining tears from his face with the back of his hand and took a deep, steadying breath. He looked Ray Manchester in the eye. Okay, he said, his voice small but firm. I'll do it. A wide, genuine grin spread across Ray's face. Yeah? Great. That's great, kid. Shuo's did a little celebratory dance that involved spinning in his chair and kicking his feet in the air. There are some things you should know, Izuku said, feeling a surge of formality. My name is Izuku Midoriya. But when I am a hero, my name is Deku, he said it with a sense of pride. It was a name that had once been an insult, reclaimed and reforged into a symbol of his journey. It was who he was. Rei's brow furrowed. Deku? Like DKU? Yes. It means one who can do it, Izuku explained earnestly. Ha, Rei said, rubbing his chin. To me it sounds like something you find stuck to the bottom of your shoe. Or like a fancy kind of duck. It's not very punchy. Not very heroic sounding. Izuku deflated slightly. Oh, we need something new. A new name for a new start, Rei declared, standing up and beginning to pace. Something that fits. You wear green. Your powers are all sparky and unpredictable. Green spark? No. The Emerald Flash? Too much like a fancy drink. I've got it. He stopped and pointed at Izuku with dramatic flair. Emerald Spark. Izuku blinked. Emerald Spark? Yeah. It's great. It's classy, it's descriptive, it sounds cool when you yell it. Rei's enthusiasm was infectious. Captain Man and his trusty sidekick, Emerald Spark. It wasn't Deku. It wasn't him. But he looked at the hope on Rei's face, the scientific Leon Schwoz, and the warm, safe, unbelievably strange cave around him. He was no longer Izuku Midoriya, the UA student. He was an interdimensional castaway. Maybe a new name wasn't just a suggestion. Maybe it was a necessity. A way to compartmentalize, to survive until he could be Deku again. He gave a small, hesitant nod. Emerald Spark. I like it, all right. Rei boomed, clapping his hands together. Welcome to the team, Emerald Spark. First things first, are you hungry? Schwoz, fire up the auto snacker. Get the kidda, what do you want? We've got burgers, tacos, soup in a cone, a single olive. As Schwoz began arguing with the food machine and Rei explained the proper technique for ordering a non-exploding burrito, Izuku leaned back against the medical bed. The pain in his ribs was a dull ache, the void where his power should be was a cold emptiness, and the grief for his lost world was a heavy shroud. But for the first time since falling through that horrifying portal, he felt a tiny, fragile spark of something new. It wasn't happiness, not yet. But it was hope. A strange, absurd, bubblegum-scented kind of hope. He was a hero in training, stranded a universe away from home. His new mentor was a man-child with indestructible skin, and his chief caretaker was a mad scientist with a questionable accent. His new name was Emerald Spark. It was, without a doubt, the weirdest day of his life. And he had a sinking, terrifying, and slightly exhilarating feeling that the weirdness was just getting started. The first week was a masterclass in disorientation. Izuku Midoriya, a boy who thrived on structure, routine, and meticulously planned training regimens, found himself in a world entirely devoid of them. His new life operated on what he could only describe as Rei time, a chaotic, unpredictable flow governed by the whims of his new mentor. Mornings didn't start with a grueling workout. They started whenever Rei decided to roll out of his ridiculously plush bed in his private quarters, often well past noon. The man cave's dietary plan, provided by the temperamental auto-snacker, consisted primarily of tube-based foods, suspiciously spherical fruits, and a type of meat that Schwoz would only refer to as post-bovine. Despite the jarring lifestyle changes, Izuku clung to the one constant he could create for himself. Every morning, before Rei or Schwoz were awake, he was in the man cave's training area. It was a spacious section with padded floors and walls, but it felt empty without the familiar crackle of One for All. He would run through his katas, the movements precise and ingrained, but the impact was hollow. His kicks, once capable of leveling buildings, now barely made a thwump against the padded walls. It was a constant, frustrating reminder of what he had lost. It was during one of these solitary sessions, sweat beading on his brow as he practiced the footwork for a shoot-style kick, that Rei finally made his grand entrance, sliding into the room wearing silk pajamas and bunny slippers, holding a steaming mug. "Whoa there, Sparky," Rei said, taking a loud slurp from his mug. "Trying to beat up the wall? It's been good to us. Hides us from the government, you know." Izuku stopped, breathing heavily. "Good morning, Rei-san. I am practicing my forms. It is crucial to maintain muscle memory, even without my quirk." Right. Muscle memory. Very important, Rei nodded sagely, though his eyes suggested he was thinking about what kind of yogurt to have for breakfast. "Look, your form is great. A+. 10 out of 10. But if you're gonna be my sidekick, we need to work on the important stuff." Izuku's eyes lit up. "You mean strategic combat? Coordinated attacks? Rescue protocols?" "Nope," Rei said, popping the P. "Banter." Izuku blinked. "Banter? Witty banter. The quips. The one-liners. The zings." Rei explained, gesturing animatedly with his mug. "Heroing is only, like 40% punching. The other 60% is looking cool and having great lines. It's showbiz, baby. You punch a guy, you say something cool. You dodge a laser, you say something cool. You get stuck in a vat of industrial mayonnaise." "You mentioned that before," Izuku interrupted, his brow furrowed in confusion. "And I had a great line for it. Ray declared. Looks like I'm in a real condiment. See? Gold. Pure gold. Now you try. A villain made of living laundry attacks you. Go. Izuku stood frozen, his analytical mind trying to process the scenario as a genuine threat. A villain made of laundry? I would first need to determine the composition. Is it cotton-based? Synthetic? This would dictate whether water or fire-based attacks would be effective. And I'd need to worry about suffocation hazards. Ray groaned, pinching the bridge of his nose. No, no, no! You're thinking, stop thinking. Just feel. You see the laundryman and you say. He struck a pose. Time to fold, fabric fiend, but what if he is comprised of unfoldable items, like socks? Izuku asked, completely serious. Ray stared at him for a long, silent moment. This is going to be harder than I thought. Before their first lesson in Heroic Theatrics 101 could continue, Schwoz zipped into the room on a self-balancing scooter that was trailing rainbow-colored smoke. The new uniform, it is ready, he announced, his voice filled with manic glee. I have splendid it. It is a masterpiece of tactical fashion. He led them over to his workshop, where a mannequin stood draped in a sheet. With a flourish worthy of a staged magician, Schwoz whipped the sheet away. Izuku's jaw dropped slightly. It was simple. And surprisingly practical. The base was a durable, dark green jumpsuit, much deeper in color than his old costume, made of a material Schwoz called impact-absorbent nanoweave. It was reinforced at the joints, with lighter, more flexible fabric at the limbs for mobility. Over this were pieces of lightweight, gunmetal gray armor plating on his chest, shoulders, and knees. The most striking features were the new gloves and boots. They were sturdier than his old ones, reinforced with metal, and etched with thin, glowing emerald lines. His signature headpiece was gone, replaced by a simple, streamlined cowl with a built-in comms system and a retractable visor. On the chest, where his hopeful smile-like design used to be, was a stylized, sharp-edged green spark symbol. It is not having the silly rabbit ears, Schwoz said proudly. I have determined they served no tactical purpose and had a drag coefficient of 0.8. Very inefficient. It's incredible, Schwoz, Izuku breathed, running a hand over the smooth material of the chest plate. It felt solid. Protective. It was a suit for a fighter, not a powerhouse. A suit for him, as he was now. Ah, but the suit is just the appetizer. Now for the main course, the gadgets. Schwoz cackled, opening a case on his workbench. Since your power is poof, I have made compensations. He presented the items one by one. First, a pair of wrist-mounted launchers. High-tensile grappling hooks. For climbing, for swinging, for tying up the bad peoples. Also, can be used to retrieve snacks from a high shelf. Next, he held up the new boots. The soles are electromagnetic. You can be walking on the walls. And they have small, rechargeable kinetic boosters. Not enough to fly, but enough for a short, powerful jump, or to soften a long fall. A hop, if you will. Finally, he pointed to the visor on the cowl. This is my favorite. It has thermal vision, night vision, and a special Schwoz vision which allows you to see the structural integrity of objects. It will highlight the weak points in a wall, a machine, a very stale bagel, whatever you are needing to break. Izuku stared at the gear, his mind already racing, calculating trajectories, stress points, and potential applications. This he understood. This was technology. This was support gear. It was like his first day's training with Meihatsum, but with a bizarre, swell-view twist. This is amazing, Izuku said, genuine gratitude in his voice. Thank you, Schwoz. You are welcome, Emerald Spark, Schwoz beamed. Now go try it on. And do not break anything I cannot fix in under an hour. The next few days were a blur of a new kind of training. Izuku took to the gadgets with an almost frightening intensity. His first attempt with the grappling hook sent him swinging directly into a large inflatable hamburger that served as a couch in the man cave's lounge area. But his mind was a supercomputer built for physics and application. He muttered to himself, calculating angles, air resistance, and reel-in speeds. Within an hour, He was zipping around the vast cavern, executing sharp turns and landing with silent precision. He mastered the hop boots next, learning to use the short, powerful bursts to chain together parkour-like movements, leaping from platforms and scaling walls in a way that almost mimicked the freedom of full cowling. The visor was his favorite. He spent hours just looking at things, the world overlaid with a glowing green grid of data. He saw the stress fracture in one of the support beams for the upper level, the overloaded circuit in the auto snacker, which explained its tendency to dispense fish instead of coffee, and the precise weak point on the ridiculously thick pickle jar Ray had been unable to open for 3 days. Ray watched all this with a mixture of pride and exasperation. "Kid, that's great and all," he said one afternoon, as Izuku was using the grappling hook to artfully snatch a tube of yogurt from the fridge across the room. "But you're still missing the point. Where's the pizzazz? The flair?" To demonstrate, Ray activated his own grappling hook from his belt, shot it at the ceiling, and did a dramatic backflip, landing perfectly in front of Izuku. "See? Style." Izuku just blinked. "But my method was 1.2 seconds faster, and consumed 18% less energy from the grappling hook's battery pack." Ray just sighed and walked away, muttering something about kids these days having no appreciation for the classics. The clash in philosophies came to a head when the real alarm finally blared. It wasn't the loud, insistent siren Izuku was used to, which signaled citywide threats. It was a series of jaunty, repetitive beeps, like a cheap doorbell. A large screen lowered from the ceiling, displaying a security feed from a convenience store called the Swellmart. The camera showed a man in a stained hoodie and a ski mask waving a water pistol at a supremely bored-looking teenage cashier. "Give me all the beef jerky," the man yelled, his voice muffled by the mask. "And the expired kind in the discount bin." "It's spicier." Izuku snapped into hero mode instantly. He was already in his new Emerald Spark costume, having insisted on wearing it to remain in a state of readiness. "Okay," he said, tapping furiously at a nearby console, his fingers flying across the keyboard. "Swellmart, corner of 5th and Maple. Suspect is one adult male, appears unarmed aside from a possible liquid-based irritant weapon. Minimal collateral damage risk. Ray-san, I will take point and enter through the roof vents using the grappling hook. You create a diversion from the front entrance. We can neutralize him in under 30 seconds. He had already pulled up architectural blueprints of the store, and was highlighting potential entry points with his finger. Ray, who had been leisurely making a smoothie, glanced at the screen. "Oh, that's just Jeff." Izuku paused. "Jeff? Yeah. Jeff Bilski. Probably the most pathetic criminal in Swellview," Ray said, taking a loud slurp of his smoothie. "He robs that place like once a month. I think the cashier, Chloe, has a crush on him. It's weird, he is still a threat to a civilian." Izuku insisted, his voice tight with urgency. "We have to act now." All right, fine," Ray sighed, putting down his smoothie. "But we're not doing your whole special forces thing. We're gonna do this my way. The fun way." He grinned. Up the tube. The sensation of being shot up a transparent tube at high speed was something Izuku decided he would never get used to. They emerged in the back room of Junk and Stuff, the fake storefront that hid the man cave's entrance. "Okay, Sparky," Ray said, his voice dropping into the commanding baritone of Captain Man as they jogged towards the exit. "Here's the plan. We walk in. I'll handle Jeff. You work on your entrance pose and try to come up with a cool one-liner. Just one. That's all I ask. But a plan of attack. The plan is to be awesome," Captain Man said, kicking the door open. "Try to keep up." They arrived at the Swellmart in under a minute. Izuku could hear the robbery in progress. "I mean it, Chloe. I'll squirt you. This thing is filled with lemon juice," Jeff threatened. "Whatever, Jeff," the cashier droned, scrolling through her phone. "My mom says you're a bad influence." Izuku took a deep breath. His first real mission in this world. He had to prove himself. He had to be a hero. He burst through the automatic doors, landing in a low, three-point combat stance, just as he'd been taught at UA. "Halt, villain!" he announced, his voice a little too loud in the small store. He activated his visor's Schwo's vision, and the store was immediately overlaid with a green grid. He saw the weak point on the shelf behind Jeff, the stress lines on the water pistol's plastic casing. You are in violation of Swellview Municipal Code 3.7b, armed robbery. Cease your hostilities immediately. Jeff and Chloe both stared at him. Who's the Power Ranger? Jeff asked, lowering his water pistol. I think he's Captain Man's new sidekick, Chloe said, not looking up from her phone. Saw him on the news. They're calling him Emerald Spark. Kinda lame. Izuku's cheeks burned under his cowl. This was not going as planned. Captain Man strolled in behind him, looking completely relaxed. Jeff. My man. We've talked about this. The expired jerky is bad for your cholesterol. Stay back, Captain Man. Jeff squeaked, pointing the water pistol at him. I'm not afraid to use this. I know. You're a real tough guy, Captain Man said soothingly, slowly walking forward. Izuku tensed, ready to spring into action. His analysis was complete. He could use a hot boost to launch himself over the counter, disarm Jeff with a precise chop to the wrist, and have him restrained with the grappling hook's cable in 3.4 seconds. It was the most efficient, logical course of action. He was about to move when Captain Man did something utterly illogical. With a speed that surprised Izuku, Captain Man didn't go for the weapon. He didn't go for a takedown. He reached forward, grabbed the elastic waistband of Jeff's sweatpants, and yanked them down to his ankles. There was a sound of ripping fabric and a sad, defeated sprowing from the overstretched elastic. Jeff stood there, frozen in shock, wearing a pair of faded, cartoon character boxer shorts. The water pistol fell from his hand, clattering to the linoleum floor. The cashier, Chloe, finally looked up from her phone, snorted with laughter, and took a picture. Jeff's face, visible through the eye holes of his ski mask, turned a deep, horrified red. Oh, come on! He whined, his voice cracking. He stumbled, trying to pull his pants up, but tripped and fell into a display of canned beans. The cans went everywhere, clattering and rolling across the floor. Captain Man dusted off his hands and turned to the cashier. Put the jerky on my tab, Chloe. He then looked at the humiliated, bean-covered Jeff and the stunned Izuku. All right, team. Our work here is done. He casually walked out of the store, whistling a cheerful tune. Izuku stood rooted to the spot, his mind struggling to process what had just happened. There was no fight. No struggle. No heroic pronouncements of justice. Just public humiliation. He looked at Jeff, who was now just sitting on the floor, surrounded by cans, looking utterly defeated. The cashier was texting furiously, no doubt sending the picture to all her friends. This wasn't heroing. This was bullying. Wasn't it? He numbly followed Ray back to the man cave, the jaunty trip up the tube doing nothing to lift his spirits. Back in the familiar blue glow of their headquarters, he pulled off his cowl, his expression a mixture of confusion and disappointment. I do not understand, he said, his voice quiet. That was not a proper takedown. You didn't apprehend him. You just embarrassed him. Ray, who was already back at the smoothie machine, turned to face him, his expression more serious than Izuku had ever seen it. Kid, what was the goal of that mission? He asked. To stop the villain and protect the civilian, Izuku answered immediately, as if reciting from a textbook. And did we do that? Well, yes, but nothing, Ray interrupted, walking over to him. Look, Izuku. I get where you're coming from. Your world, from what you've told me, sounds intense. Life and death stakes, big epic fights, villains who could probably level this whole city. Here? Our biggest threat last week was a guy who was turning all the town's poodles into bread. We called him the Poodler. He placed a hand on Izuku's shoulder. That guy, Jeff? He's not a monster. He's a lonely, pathetic dude who robs a convenience store for attention. If I went in there, broke his arm, and hauled him off to jail, what would that accomplish? He'd get out in a week and do it again. But now he's been pantsed in front of the girl he probably likes. He's the joke of Swellview High's group chat. You think he's gonna show his face in that store again anytime soon? Izuku was silent, the logic of Ray's words slowly sinking in. Being a hero isn't always about hitting things as hard as you can, kid, Ray continued, his voice softer now. It's about solving the problem. It's about proportionality. You don't use a Detroit smash to stop a pickpocket. In Mizurufu, maybe you have to be a soldier, but in Swellview, sometimes you just have to be the bigger, smarter, and occasionally, meaner guy on the playground. He gestured around the man cave. The villains here are absurd. They're ridiculous. And you can't fight ridiculousness with deadly seriousness. You'll go crazy. You have to meet them on their level. You fight the toddler with humiliation. You fight Dr. Minyak with cleverness. You fight Jeff with a good, old-fashioned pantsing. Izuku looked down at his new gauntlets, flexing his fingers. He had been so focused on what he couldn't do, on the power he'd lost, that he hadn't considered that his entire approach to heroing might need to change as well. He had analyzed the structure of the building, but not the structure of the problem. Ray, for all his goofiness, had seen the real weakness, Jeff's pathetic dignity. So, the banter, the poses. Izuku said slowly. That's part of it? It's not just for show, it's part of the solution. Ray grinned, his jovial attitude returning. It shows them you're not scared. It makes them angry, sloppy. It makes the good citizens feel safe and entertained. It's all part of the package, Sparky. The Swellview package. A small, hesitant smile touched Izuku's lips for the first time in what felt like an eternity. He had so much to learn. It was like being a first-year student all over again, but the curriculum was completely alien. He wouldn't be learning how to control a world-breaking power. He would be learning how to quip, how to make an entrance. How to understand that sometimes, the most effective way to save the day didn't involve a single punch. Okay, Izuku said, looking up at Ray with a newfound determination in his eyes. Okay, Ray-san. Teach me how to be a Swellview hero. Ray's grin widened. That's the spirit. Now, let's start with that one-liner. The store was selling beans. Jeff was acting like a baby. Something in there. Looks like you've been a bad boy. No, that's terrible. We'll workshop it. As Ray began pacing, muttering potential puns to himself, Izuku felt a strange sense of peace settle over him. His home was a universe away, and his power was a ghost. But he had a new suit, new skills to master, and a new, incredibly bizarre, philosophy of heroism to understand. It wasn't the path he had chosen, but it was a path, and for the first time, he felt ready to walk it. The next few weeks settled into a bizarre rhythm that Izuku began to recognize as Swellview's version of normal. His days were a strange blend of intense physical training with his new gadgets, and even more intense mental training in Ray's school of heroic charm. He learned that a well-timed hair flip could be as disarming as a smoke pellet, and that the key to a good pun was to deliver it with absolute, unwavering confidence, no matter how much it made you want to cringe internally. His nights were spent in a small, comfortable room that Schwoz had converted from a storage closet, poring over data. He wasn't just studying Swellview's villains, he was studying Swellview itself. He analyzed traffic patterns to optimize patrol routes, studied the city's power grid for potential vulnerabilities, and even read through the last 10 years of the Swellview newspaper archives, compiling a surprisingly thick file on Mayor Tinfoil's erratic policy decisions. He filled a new notebook, Notebook 15, titled Hero Analysis for a New World, with detailed breakdowns of Captain Man's fighting style, a chaotic but effective mix of brawling and acrobatics he dubbed Wimfu, Schwo's inventions, categorized by their likelihood to explode, and the psychological profiles of recurring C-list villains. The flickering of one for all remained a frustratingly unpredictable element in his life. Sometimes, during a simple walk across the man cave, his leg would surge with a 5% burst, sending him stumbling. Other times, in the middle of a training exercise where a jolt of power would have been incredibly useful, he would be met with nothing but an empty, hollow feeling. Schwoz, ever the scientist, had him keep a detailed log, noting his emotional state, diet, and even the ambient temperature whenever a flicker occurred, searching for a pattern. So far, the only conclusion was that the quirk was a cosmic prankster with a terrible sense of timing. Izuku was meticulously cleaning the lens on his cowl one afternoon, humming a tune from a Swellview pop song he couldn't get out of his head, when the man cave's elevator dinged. This was unusual. Ray was upstairs in junk and stuff trying to teach a parrot to say up the tube, and Schwoz was calibrating what he called a fart silencer in his workshop. Izuku was alone. He instinctively dropped into a defensive stance, his hand hovering over the grappling hook on his wrist. The elevator doors hissed open, and 3 figures stepped out. They weren't villains. They were young, around his own age, and they were looking around the man cave with an air of comfortable familiarity that immediately put Izuku on edge. There was a tall, handsome young man with floppy brown hair, a sharp, intelligent-looking young woman with dark, curly hair and a tablet tucked under her arm, and a goofy, curly-haired boy wearing a brightly colored shirt that seemed to be made entirely of pictures of tacos. The tall one's eyes landed on Izuku, and his friendly expression tightened almost imperceptibly. He took in the new green and gray costume, the sparks symbol on the chest, and the kid standing in the middle of his man cave. "Well," the tall one said, his voice laced with a complex mix of surprise and something else, something that sounded a bit like hurt. "Looks like the rumors were true. Ray got a new toy." Before Izuku could respond, the girl with the tablet stepped forward, her eyes bright with sharp, analytical curiosity. "The energy signature readings from Jasper's G-spotter went off the charts last week. We thought it was a malfunction, but the readings were consistent with a contained, high-level energy anomaly." "That's you, isn't it? You're the anomaly." Izuku managed, completely thrown. "Don't mind them," the boy in the taco shirt said with a wide, friendly grin. "I'm Jasper. That's Charlotte, and Mr. Broody over there is Henry. We, used to work here." The names clicked in Izuku's mind. Henry Hart. Charlotte Page. Jasper Dunlop. He had read about them in the archives. Captain Man's former sidekicks, the legendary Kid Danger and the brilliant minds who supported him. He was standing in the presence of Swellview royalty. He immediately straightened up and bowed deeply from the waist, a sign of respect so ingrained it was second nature. "It is an honor to meet you. I am Izuku Midoriya. My hero designation is Emerald Spark." The formal gesture seemed to throw them off even more. Jasper blinked. Charlotte raised an eyebrow. Henry just crossed his arms, his expression unreadable. "So, you're the new Kid Danger," Henry stated, the words flat. It wasn't a question. "No," Izuku said quickly, shaking his head. "No, I could never replace him. I am simply an assistant. A temporary partner." The last thing he wanted was to step on the toes of a legacy. He knew all too well the weight that came with following in a hero's footsteps. The tension in the room was thick enough to be cut with one of Schwo's laser spatulas. It was broken by the cheerful, oblivious voice of Ray Manchester, sliding down a fireman's pole that Izuku hadn't even known existed. "Henry! Char! Jasper! What's up, my old crew?" Ray exclaimed, landing with a perfect superhero flourish. He then seemed to notice the 5-way standoff happening in the middle of his lair. "Oh. Right. This is Izuku. My new intern." Henry shot Ray a look that was a potent cocktail of "Are you serious? And we need to talk, intern?" Charlotte repeated, her sharp gaze flicking between Ray and Izuku. "He's wearing a supersuit, Ray. Interns usually just fetch coffee. Or in your case, tube yogurt." "Yeah, man," Jasper chimed in. "You got a new sidekick and you didn't tell us? Not cool. I had to find out from my mom's friend Brenda who saw you pants Jeff at the Swellmart with a little green guy." Ray had the decency to look slightly sheepish. "It all happened really fast. He kind of fell out of the sky. Literally. It's a whole thing. Long story?" Henry's expression didn't soften. "We've got time." The next hour was a whirlwind of exposition. Ray, with frequent, more scientific interjections from Schwo's, who had been drawn out of his lab by the commotion, explained Izuku's bizarre arrival. They told the story of the portal, the unstable quirk, the fight with the toddler, and the deal they had struck. Izuku stood silently by, feeling like an exhibit in a museum. He watched the faces of the former team as they listened. Jasper looked amazed, his mouth hanging open. Charlotte was completely absorbed, her fingers tapping away at her tablet, cross-referencing Schwo's technobabble with what looked like quantum physics articles. Henry, however, remained quiet. He listened intently, his gaze fixed on Izuku, studying him. Izuku could feel the weight of that stare. It wasn't hostile, not exactly. It was evaluative. It was the look of a seasoned veteran sizing up a rookie, a former partner assessing his replacement. When the story was finished, a silence fell over the group. It was Charlotte who broke it, her eyes gleaming with intellectual excitement. She walked right up to Izuku, her tablet held out. "Your quirk, one for all," she began, her voice fast and precise. "You said it stockpiles energy and is passed from user to user. That's fascinating. Does that mean it contains a sort of residual consciousness? A genetic or spiritual memory from the previous users?" Izuku was stunned. She had cut right to the core of one for all's greatest secrets, a truth he had only learned after months of training. "How did you?" "It's a logical extrapolation," Charlotte said with a shrug. "If it's stockpiling more than just raw power, it would have to be storing information. Data. Otherwise, each new user would have to learn to control its full output from scratch, which would be incredibly destructive and inefficient. The residual memories must act as a sort of organic user manual." Izuku stared at her, completely floored. He had never met anyone, aside from perhaps Mei Hatsum, whose mind moved that quickly. He felt a sudden, powerful kinship with her. "Yes. That's exactly it," he said, his own excitement bubbling up. He launched into an explanation of the vestiges, the dreamlike world within his quirk, and the wisdom of the past users. Charlotte kept pace, asking sharp, insightful questions about energy transfer, synaptic imprints, and dimensional resonance. Soon, the two of them were huddled over her tablet, sketching out diagrams and debating theoretical physics, completely lost in their own world of high-level analysis. Jasper, seeing them occupied, ambled over to Izuku with a friendly, slightly goofy smile. "So, another dimension, huh? Cool. Are there, like, bucket-shaped people there? 'Cause I collect buckets, and I've always wondered if there's a dimension where buckets are the dominant life form." Izuku, pulled from his conversation with Charlotte, just blinked. No. No bucket people. As far as I know." "Ah, man. Bummer," Jasper said, though he didn't seem too disappointed. "So, you're really a hero in training over there? Like, for real? What's the weirdest villain you ever fought?" The question was so genuine, so innocently curious, that Izuku couldn't help but smile. He found himself telling Jasper about Gentle Criminal, about the sludge villain, about the practical exams at UA. He simplified the stories, leaving out the more traumatic details, but Jasper listened with wide-eyed wonder, reacting to every twist and turn with a gasp or a no way. While these new bonds were forming, Henry pulled Ray aside to the other end of the man cave, near the auto snacker. His voice was low, but Izuku could still catch snippets of the conversation. "Ray, what were you thinking?" Henry hissed. "He's just a kid. And he's from another dimension? He's completely alone. That's a huge responsibility." "I know that," Ray said, his usual cheerfulness absent. "But did you see him, Henry? He's got the heart. He reminds me a little of, well, you. When you first started. All serious, and trying to do the right thing, even when you were terrified." "That's different," Henry insisted. "I had a family to go home to. I had Charlotte and Jasper. I had a life outside of this place." "What does he have?" "He has us," Ray said simply. "He has me. And Schwoz. And now, maybe he has you guys too." Henry fell silent, his gaze drifting back to where Izuku was now enthusiastically explaining the schematics of his original Air Force gloves to a fascinated Charlotte, while Jasper tried to demonstrate his own fighting move, which mostly involved flailing his arms around. He saw the genuine passion in Izuku's eyes, the way he lit up when talking about heroics. He saw the easy way Charlotte had connected with his intellect, and the way Jasper had broken through his formal shell. He sighed, the tension finally leaving his shoulders. Ray was an impulsive, egotistical, to-be-overt addicted man-child. But his instincts about people were usually spot on. He had seen the potential in Henry all those years ago. And now he saw it in this strange, green-haired kid from another universe. Henry walked back over to the group, his posture more relaxed. Izuku noticed his approach and his excited explanation trailed off, his demeanor becoming more reserved again. "So," Henry said, his tone even. "Schwoz gave you the whole gadget treatment, huh? Grappling hook, jump boots, what else?" He calls this Schwo's vision, Izuku said, tapping the side of his cowl. It lets me see structural weaknesses. Henry's lips quirked into a small smile. Let me guess. He tried to get you to call it the Looky-Loo? He suggested the Fault Finder 5000, Izuku replied. He's getting more creative, Henry chuckled. Look, Izuku. Being Rei's sidekick, it's not easy. He's going to drive you crazy. He's going to forget your birthday. He's going to use your toothbrush. And he's definitely going to blame you when one of his stupid plans goes wrong. Hey! My plans are brilliantly conceived, Rei yelled from across the room. But he'll also have your back, Henry continued, ignoring him. No matter what. He'll throw himself in front of a laser for you. He'll be the most loyal, frustrating, and ridiculous friend you've ever had. My advice? Don't try to make him follow a plan. Just have a better one ready for when his inevitably blows up in your face. And learn to tune out the sound of him chewing. It was a peace offering. An acceptance. A passing of the torch, not of the title of Kid Danger, but of the incredibly specific, high-stress job of being Rei Manchester's partner. Izuku felt a wave of relief so profound it almost made him dizzy. Thank you, Henry-san. Just Henry, he said with a genuine smile. And hey, if you ever need to talk, or you need help with homework, or you just want to get away from this place for a few hours and eat some real, non-tube-based food, just call. Charlotte nodded in agreement. Definitely. We can form a study group. I want to pick your brain about applied quark theory, and I can show you my bucket collection. Jasper added enthusiastically. Later that evening, after the old team had gone, the man cave felt different. It felt less like a secret bunker and more like a home. Izuku sat on the couch, rereading the contact information Henry had programmed into his new Swellviewsheet phone. He had a support system. It wasn't the one he'd left behind, but it was real. Rei came over and flopped down onto the inflatable hamburger couch, letting out a contented sigh. They're good kids, huh? They are, Izuku agreed. You were lucky to have them. Yeah, Rei said, his voice quiet. I was. Still am. He sat up, looking at Izuku. Henry's right, you know. I am probably going to drive you crazy. I have some experience with difficult mentors, Izuku said, a small smile playing on his lips as he thought of Aizawa-sensei's strict training and All Might's booming, often overwhelming, presence. Good, Rei grinned. Then you should fit right in. Izuku realized that the ghosts of the past weren't haunting the man cave. They were its foundation. Henry, Charlotte, and Jasper weren't specters of a better time. They were alumni, a living legacy that he was now a part of. He wasn't a replacement. He was the next chapter. For the first time since his brutal arrival, the crushing weight of his loneliness began to lift. He was still stranded, still fundamentally broken, but he wasn't entirely alone anymore. He had a team, a weird, dysfunctional, but fiercely loyal team. And in the chaotic, ridiculous world of Swellview, that was more than enough to keep a hero's spark alive. Deep in the sweltering, sun-baked landscape of the Arizona desert, miles away from the neon-soaked absurdity of Swellview, a different kind of survival was taking place. This world was a harsh and alien landscape to Kaido Tanaka, a man whose entire life had been spent in the steel and glass canyons of urban Japan. Here, the only canyons were carved from red rock by millennia of wind and water, and the sun was a relentless, unforgiving tyrant. Kaido, or as he had been known in the carefully ordered hierarchy of the Paranormal Liberation Front, Glitch, stumbled through the scrubland, his tattered bodysuit offering little protection from the scorching heat or the thorny plants that clawed at his legs. He was not a frontline warrior. He was a tech specialist, a support operative. His quirk, unstable gait, was a tool for disruption and escape, not direct combat. It was a scalpel, not a sword, and out here, in this endless expanse of dirt and heat, it was almost useless. The dimensional transit had been even more brutal on him than it had been on the hero brat. While Midoriya had been spat out into a populated, resource-rich city, Kaido had been vomited into the heart of a desolate wasteland. His helmet was cracked, his systems were fried, and his quirk was dangerously erratic. For the first few days, he had nearly died of thirst. The portals he managed to tear open were small and uncontrollable, blinking open for mere seconds. He'd catch glimpses of other worlds, a landscape of crystalline trees, a roiling ocean of magma, a cityscape of impossible, twisting architecture, but never anything useful. Never a way back. His quirk, like Midoriya's, was damaged. The raw, chaotic energy of the dimensional tear had overloaded his nervous system. He could no longer choose where his portals went, or how long they stayed open. He could only create the tear, a wild, unpredictable rip in the fabric of space. It was like having a gun that fired in a random direction every time he pulled the trigger. But Kaido was a survivor. He was patient. He scavenged, he observed, and he learned. He eventually stumbled upon a dusty, two-lane highway, and from there, a forgotten gas station with a leaky faucet that saved his life. He learned enough of this world's language from discarded newspapers and a crackling radio to understand the basics. And most importantly, he began to feel a pull. It was a faint, almost imperceptible thrum of energy on the edge of his senses. A strange, constant, and incredibly powerful energy signature, unlike anything he had ever felt before. Quirks had signatures, of course, unique energy patterns that could be traced and identified. But this was different. It wasn't a quirk. It was a fundamental property of a person, like their own personal law of physics. It was a beacon of impossibly stable, inexhaustible power. He followed that beacon. Hitchhiking, stowing away on freight trains, and stealing when he had to, he made his slow, methodical way northeast. The signal grew stronger, more defined, pulling him like a moth to a cosmic flame. His own damaged quirk seemed to resonate with it, the portals he created becoming slightly less erratic, more focused, the closer he got. He knew, with an instinct born of his quirk's nature, that if he could get his hands on that power source, he could stabilize his gates. He could control them. He could open a stable, targeted portal right back to the Paranormal Liberation Front headquarters. Back home. His journey finally led him to the outskirts of a city that seemed to practically vibrate with a strange, low-level comic energy. The sign on the highway read, "Welcome to Swellview." It's swell. Kaito felt the beacon was close now, its source located somewhere within this bizarrely named metropolis. But he was weak, and his resources were non-existent. He needed a lab. He needed equipment. He needed a local partner, a pawn who knew the landscape and had access to the kind of technology he required. He began his search. He lived in the shadows, observing, his sharp, analytical mind piecing together the power dynamics of this strange city. He learned of its singular, seemingly indestructible hero, Captain Man. The energy signature was coming from him. The hero himself was the power source. The irony was so rich it was almost sickening. The key to his escape was the one man who would surely try to stop him. His research into Captain Man inevitably led him to the hero's rogues gallery. He dismissed most of them as incompetent buffoons, the toddler, Jeff, Drillfinger. They were clowns, not collaborators. But one name kept cropping up in connection with genuine, high-level scientific malevolence: Dr. Arthur Minyak. Minyak was a genius, that much was clear from the reports of his absurdly advanced, if thematically challenged, inventions. But he was also a failure. Every one of his brilliant, diabolical plans had been thwarted by Captain Man. He was a man driven by a massive intellect and an even more massive ego, crippled by constant defeat. He was, in short, the perfect tool. Kaido tracked him down to a dilapidated, abandoned observatory on the outskirts of the city, a place Minyak used as a lair of calculated villainy, according to a breathless news report Kaido found online. He phased through a solid steel door using a series of microportals, a trick that left him dizzy and nauseous, and found the diminutive scientist hunched over a workbench, muttering furiously to himself as he tried to attach a death ray to a swarm of robotic butterflies. "It is the wings!" Dr. Minyak shrieked to his green, vaguely humanoid assistant, cohort. "The vibrational frequency of the lepidopteran wing structure is interfering with the plasma modulation. They are beautiful, but they are useless." Useless! He swept the entire project off the table in a fit of rage. Cohort simply began sweeping up the mess with a tiny broom. "You lack ambition." The voice was cold, quiet, and came from the darkest corner of the observatory. Dr. Minyak and Cohort spun around. Kaido stepped out of the shadows, his gaunt form and tattered, otherworldly suit making him look like a specter. "Who are you? How did you get in here?" Minyak demanded, grabbing a device that looked like a hairdryer with a satellite dish glued to it. "My name is not important," Kaido said, his English precise and unaccented, a stark contrast to the colorful dialects of Swellview. "What is important is what I can offer you." He raised a hand. The air next to Dr. Minyak's head shimmered. A small, unstable gate, no bigger than a coin, blinked into existence. From it, one of the broken robotic butterflies from the floor was pulled in, vanished, and then dropped back onto the floor a foot to the left. The portal snapped shut. Dr. Minyak's eyes went wide. He wasn't looking at the butterfly. He was looking at the residual energy signature, the faint scorch mark on reality itself. Transspatial displacement, on a quantum level. That's impossible. For you, perhaps, Kaido said with a dismissive shrug. For me, it is a trifle. Imagine your inventions, Doctor, enhanced with my technology. Imagine a death ray that doesn't need to be aimed, whose beam can be delivered directly inside Captain Man's ridiculously durable skull. Imagine an army that can bypass walls, teleport behind enemy lines. Imagine the power to finally, truly, defeat your nemesis. Minyak was breathing heavily, his mind, a raging torrent of scientific possibility, already captivated. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice a suspicious whisper. "Access to your lab. Your resources," Kaido said smoothly. "And your expertise. There is a unique power source in the city. I need to harness it to stabilize my abilities and return to my own world. That power source is Captain Man." He laid out the plan. It was simple in concept, brilliant in its audacity. They would not try to destroy Captain Man. They would use him. They would build a device, a siphon, capable of drawing out and storing the strange, indestructible energy that radiated from the hero's body. That stored energy would be more than enough to power a stable, controllable gateway. "Once I have what I need, I will be gone," Kaido concluded. "And I will leave the siphon and its designs for you. With a sample of Captain Man's own power, you could create weapons that could finally hurt him. You could grant yourself indestructibility. You would have everything you've ever wanted. Vengeance. Victory." It was an irresistible offer. For Dr. Minyak, a man starved of respect and success, it was the ultimate temptation. The chance to not just defeat his enemy, but to turn his enemy's greatest strength into the instrument of his own triumph. He looked at the strange, shadowy figure before him. He didn't trust him. But he trusted the science he had just witnessed. "You have a deal," Dr. Minyak said, a slow, malevolent grin spreading across his face. "Let's get to work." Back in the man cave, life had found its new normal. Izuku was thriving under the strange tutelage of his new friends. Charlotte had become his intellectual sparring partner, and their conversations often devolved into rapid-fire debates about theoretical science that left everyone else in the room dizzy. Jasper had appointed himself Izuku's cultural guide, introducing him to the vital Swellview traditions of competitive minigolf, the culinary art of the fertile chip, and the complex social hierarchy of the local high school, which they had enrolled him in as Rei's visiting nephew from Japan, Ika. The cover story was flimsy, but in a town like Swellview, it was more than enough. Henry served as a different kind of mentor. He was the one Izuku went to when Rei's logic became too circular or Shuo's inventions became too dangerous. Henry understood the unique pressures of the job, the balance between a normal life and a heroic one, in a way no one else could. One rainy Tuesday, the crime alarm blared, the serious one this time, a piercing siren that meant a high-level threat. "What we got?" Rei called out, sliding down the pole with a bucket of popcorn in his hand. Charlotte was already at the main console, her fingers flying across the holographic keyboard. Multiple alarms tripped at the Swellview Institute of Technology's Quantum Research Division. "It's a high-security lockdown, but something got through." Izuku was already pulling on his cowl. "A villain with a phasing or teleportation quirk?" he asked, his mind immediately cataloging possibilities. "Or just really good at picking locks," Rei added, shoveling popcorn into his mouth. Up the tube, they arrived at the scene to find a surreal level of chaos. The main laboratory was a wreck. Sophisticated equipment lay smashed on the floor. Security guards were either unconscious or wrapped head to toe in what looked like giant, sticky fruit roll-ups. In the center of the room, a massive cryogenic stasis chamber had been ripped open. Its primary component, a fist-sized, crystalline energy regulator, was missing. "Well," Captain Man said, surveying the damage. "Looks like somebody had a case of the Mondays." Izuku ignored the quip, his eyes scanning every detail of the room. His visor was active, the Schwo's vision highlighting a network of hairline fractures in the walls and floor, all radiating from a single point. But it was something else that caught his attention. A faint, almost invisible shimmer in the air. An energy residue. He felt a cold knot of dread form in his stomach. It was familiar. "Rei-san," he said, his voice low and urgent. "This energy. I've felt it before." He knelt, running his gloved fingers over a scorch mark on the floor that didn't come from any conventional weapon. It was a scar on space itself. He closed his eyes, his mind flashing back to that terrible, chaotic day in Muzurifu. The roaring vortex, the feeling of being torn apart, the distorted, shriek-like voice of the villain. "Wartlock. It's him," Izuku whispered, his blood running cold. "The villain who sent me here. He's in Swellview." Captain Man's jovial expression vanished, replaced by a grim line. "Are you sure? The residual energy signature is identical," Izuku said, standing up. "My quirk, it's reacting to it. It's faint, but it's there." He could feel that hollow space inside him ache, a phantom limb sensing a storm. The idea that his only potential ticket home was here, not as a prisoner, but as an active threat, filled him with a dizzying mix of hope and terror. They spent the next hour examining the scene. The police, led by a perpetually exasperated Officer Kogen, could make no sense of it. There was no sign of forced entry. The security logs had been wiped, not with a virus, but as if the data itself had been scooped out of reality. Back in the man cave, Izuku paced back and forth like a caged tiger, the rhythmic squeak of his boots echoing in the cavern. "It doesn't make sense," he muttered, the words spilling out in a rapid stream. His quirk, unstable gait, it was completely uncontrollable. He couldn't name it, he couldn't choose his destination. He certainly couldn't use it for a precision infiltration like the one at the lab. It was like throwing a bomb, not picking a lock. "Maybe he got better?" Ray suggested, leaning back in a chair with his feet up on the console. To improve control of a quirk to that degree would take years of intense, specialized training, Izuku countered, shaking his head. And even then, the fundamental nature of the quirk wouldn't change. It's called unstable gait for a reason. What we saw at the lab, that was precise. Targeted. It's as if someone took his bomb and turned it into a guided missile. Charlotte, who had been analyzing the energy readings they'd collected, looked up from her screen. "Izuku's right. The residue signature is the same, but the application is completely different. The portals used at the lab were microscopic and lasted for less than a nanosecond. They were used to bypass circuitry, to displace locked tumblers, to move through solid matter. That requires a level of control that borders on rewriting physics. So he's not working alone," Izuku concluded, the pieces clicking into place. He found a partner. Someone with the scientific knowledge to refine and focus his quirk. "A brainiac bad guy," Ray said, sitting up straight. "That narrows it down. In Swellview, that usually means one name comes to mind. Dr. Minyak," Izuku and Charlotte said in unison. The mood in the man cave shifted. Dr. Minyak wasn't a joke like Jeff. He was a genuine threat, a deranged genius whose intellect was matched only by his pettiness. The idea of him collaborating with a dimension-hopping villain from Izuku's world was a terrifying one. It was an alliance of two different flavors of evil, a fusion of high-tech malevolence and paranormal chaos. What were they after? Izuku asked, turning his attention to the stolen component. The cryoregulator. Schwo's, who had been quietly examining a schematic of the stolen device, suddenly gasped. Oh, that is not good. That is the opposite of good. That is bad. What is it, Schwo's? Ray asked. The quantum cryoregulator is not for freezing things. Schwo's explained, his voice uncharacteristically serious. It is a piece of experimental technology designed to stabilize highly volatile energy fields. It can take a chaotic energy source, like, say, a tiny, unstable black hole, or a very angry hamster on a wheel, and it makes the energy output smooth, stable, and controllable. The final piece of the puzzle slammed into place in Izuku's mind, and the full horror of the situation became clear. They're not trying to build a weapon, he said, his voice barely a whisper. They're trying to fix his quirk. They stole the regulator to build a machine, a device to stabilize his unstable gates. And if they can do that, Charlotte added, her eyes wide, he could open a portal to anywhere. Anytime. Any dimension. He could go home, Izuku breathed. The unspoken second half of that thought hung heavy in the air. And he could bring an army back with him. The weight of his old world, of the war he had been fighting, crashed down on Izuku. The Paranormal Liberation Front was a terrifying, organized threat, capable of bringing his entire country to its knees. If they gained the ability to cross dimensions, to invade worlds that had no concept of quirks, no all might to stand against them, the consequences were unimaginable. This was no longer just about protecting Swellview from a goofy villain of the week. This was about protecting this entire reality from an enemy it wasn't equipped to handle. His personal quest to get home had just become a mission to stop anyone else from crossing over. The stakes had been raised to an impossible degree. His two worlds, once separated by an impassable dimensional gulf, were about to collide, with him standing right at the epicenter, and he had to face it all without the one power that had ever given him the strength to stand against the darkness. The shadow from his world had followed him, and it threatened to swallow this new one whole.